Poor little girl sees a young, wealthy man crying alone in the town square on Christmas Eve. You're sad and alone. Don't you want to spend Christmas at my house? What happens next is unbelievable. The snowflakes fell slowly that Christmas Eve, forming a white blanket that covered the empty town square. It was 6 in the evening, and the colorful lights were already twinkling on the trees and lampposts. Families hurried past with last-minute shopping bags, all heading to the same destination, the warmth of their homes. Everyone, except Holden. Sitting on a weather-worn wooden bench, he watched the activity with empty eyes. People smiled, quickened their pace. Some even hummed Christmas carols. The world was spinning in celebration while he remained motionless, as if an invisible wall stood between him and the joy that hung in the air. He had been there for 2 hours already. The cold seeped through his worn-out coat, but he barely felt it. Ever since he lost Lucas in the accident 2 years ago, the cold outside never matched the one that had settled inside him. The date only made everything worse. Christmas Eve, the exact day the car had skidded on the icy road. Since then, the holidays had become a ghost he tried to avoid. The snow was now dusting his shoulders and hair. Holden didn't even notice the tears that began to stream down his face. His thoughts were far away, trapped in that night of sirens and ambulance lights, in the hospital hallway, in the doctor's words. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Harper. Why are you crying?" The childish voice startled him. Beside him, a little girl with curly hair and a red hat was staring at him with curious eyes. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old. "I'm not crying," he said, quickly wiping his face. "It's just the melting snow." The girl tilted her head, weighing his answer with the seriousness only children can muster when they know an adult is lying. "My name is Hazel," she said, holding out a small hand covered in a colorful mitten. "What's yours?" Holden hesitated before lightly shaking her hand. "Holden, Holden," she repeated, as if testing the sound. "That's a funny name." Despite everything, a smile threatened to appear at the corner of his mouth. It had been so long since he'd smiled that the movement felt foreign. Hazel sat next to him on the bench, swinging her legs that didn't reach the ground. "No one should be alone on Christmas," she said, looking at the square's lights. Then she turned to him with a determined expression. "You're all alone. Do you want to spend Christmas at my house?" Holden blinked, caught completely off guard. It was the last thing he expected to hear. "Hazel!" a woman's voice called out, and a young woman approached hurriedly. "How many times do I have to tell you not to wander off like that and not to talk to Strand—" She stopped when she saw the man sitting on the bench, with snow on his shoulders and red eyes. "I'm sorry," she said, taking her daughter's hand. "I hope she wasn't bothering you." "She wasn't," Holden replied, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Mom, he's sad," Hazel declared with the frankness only children possess. "And he's alone. I invited him for Christmas dinner." The woman, Leah, as Holden would later learn, looked from her daughter to him, embarrassed. Holden noticed her worn gloves, the coat discreetly patched at the elbow, the simple shoes. She wasn't much older than him, maybe 30, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had faced many battles. "We're leaving now, sweetie," she said to her daughter, gently tugging her along. "But Mom," Hazel protested, "you always say Christmas is for sharing." An uncomfortable silence hung between them. The snow continued to fall, now heavier. "Nurse, thank you. I don't want to be a bother," Holden answered automatically. Leah breathed a sigh of relief, but something in the girl's eyes, a mix of disappointment and genuine concern, hit him like a punch to the gut. "I'm sorry about my daughter," Leah said. "She has this habit of wanting to help everyone." Holden nodded, suddenly aware of how he must look, a disheveled man sitting alone on Christmas Eve, crying on a park bench. Leah took Hazel by the hand and turned to leave, but the girl resisted. "But Mom, you made that baked mac and cheese everyone loves. And there's cake, too." Leah closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, there was a mix of resignation and kindness there. She turned back to Holden. "Dinner is simple," she said, after a moment of hesitation. "But there's room at the table, if you'd like." The words hung in the air between them, like snowflakes. Holden felt something strange in his chest. A tightness, but different from the constant ache of the last few years. It was as if a door he didn't even know existed had been unlocked. "I don't want to impose," he repeated, more out of habit than conviction. "It's not an imposition," Hazel answered before her mother could say anything. "Say it's Christmas." Leah smiled slightly, the first smile Holden had seen on her face. "She's not one to give up easily," she explained. "Trust me, I know." Maybe it was the falling snow, or the girl's hopeful gaze, or simply the exhaustion of being alone for so long. Holden found himself nodding. "If it's no bother, I accept." "Thank you." Hazel's smile lit up the night more than all the Christmas lights in the square. During the short walk to their apartment, Holden stopped at a small grocery store that was still open and bought a festive fruitcake. It wasn't much, but he couldn't arrive empty-handed. What was he doing, going to the home of strangers on Christmas Eve? This wasn't how he'd planned to spend the night, alone with his memories like the past 2 years. The building was a simple walk-up, an old one with narrow stairs and no elevator. 3rd floor. Holden followed the two of them in silence, while Hazel chattered non-stop about the lights, the snow, and how her teacher said Santa Claus always knows which children have been good all year. "It's not very big," Leah said as she opened the apartment door. It was an apology, he realized, but an unnecessary one. The place was small, yes, but cozy. A modest Christmas tree occupied a corner of the living room, decorated with ornaments that were clearly handmade, some probably by Hazel, judging by the irregular shapes and excess of glitter. A table was already set for 2, with simple but carefully arranged plates. "I'll get another plate," Leah said, disappearing into the small kitchen. Hazel pulled Holden by the hand. "Come see the tree. I made that angel there, and that star, and that... I don't know what that is, but I made it too." The girl's laughter echoed through the apartment, filling every corner. It was a strange sound to Holden's ears, accustomed to silence, and yet it wasn't unpleasant. As Hazel proudly showed off each ornament, Holden observed the apartment. Small, with used furniture but impeccably clean and organized. On the walls, colorful drawings, obviously Hazel's work, replaced expensive paintings. There were plants on the windowsill and a stack of children's books next to the sofa. It wasn't a place rich in money, but it was rich in life. The meal was simple, as Leah had warned. A large dish of baked mac and cheese, a side salad, and bread. For dessert, there was the fruitcake Holden had brought and a simple cake that Hazel proudly announced she had helped make. "I cracked the eggs and stirred the batter, but Mommy wouldn't let me use the oven because it's dangerous." During dinner, it was mostly Hazel who talked, telling them about her school, her friends, and the stories her mother read to her before bed. Leah intervened occasionally, correcting details or tempering her daughter's enthusiasm. Holden just listened, responding with monosyllables when a question was directed at him. But, slowly, something strange began to happen. The knot that constantly remained in his chest, the one that tightened with every breath since the accident, seemed to loosen a bit. It didn't disappear, of course, but for the first time in 2 years it didn't hurt so much to breathe. When the clock struck 9, Leah announced it was time for Hazel to go to sleep. "But Mom, it's Christmas, and we have a guest," the girl protested. "And tomorrow is still Christmas. And you want to be rested to open your present, don't you?" With promises that Holden could come back another day, Hazel finally agreed to go to bed, but not before giving him a surprisingly strong hug. "Good night, Holden. I'm glad you weren't alone today." When Leah returned from the bedroom after putting her daughter to bed, she found Holden standing, ready to leave. "Thank you," he said, "for dinner, and for the company." Leah smiled slightly. "It was Hazel who invited you." "Even so, you didn't have to do this." She shrugged. "Maybe we needed it just as much as you did." At the door, before leaving, Holden paused. "Your daughter, she's special." "I know," Leah replied. There was so much pride in her voice that it made Holden feel a pang of something he couldn't immediately identify. When he reached the street, the snow had stopped falling. The cold night air filled his lungs, but for the first time in a long time, Holden felt something other than the cold and the pain. Warmth. A small, timid warmth, like a newly lit candle in a dark room. It wasn't enough to dispel all the shadows, but it was enough to remind him that maybe There was still light in the world. Holden woke up the next morning with the sunlight hitting his face. He had forgotten to close the curtains, something that hadn't happened in a long time. Usually, he made sure the room remained in dim light, as if the darkness better matched what he felt inside. For a moment, he lay there, just watching the rays of light dance on the ceiling. It was Christmas Day. For the last 2 years, this date had meant locking himself at home with a bottle of whiskey and waiting for the day to end. But today, there was something different in the air. The memories of the previous night came back slowly. The square, the snow, the little girl in the red hat, the small, cozy apartment, the set table, the homemade mac and cheese. Holden got up and went to the window. The snow had stopped, and the world outside looked clean like a blank page. He felt something strange in his chest, a feeling he couldn't name. It wasn't happiness, not yet. But it was the absence of that constant pain, at least for a few moments. While having coffee, his eyes fell on the closet in the hallway. He hesitated, but after a few minutes he stood up and walked over to it. The key was hidden on top of the doorframe where he had left it 2 years ago, vowing never to open that door again. Lucas's room was exactly as he had left it. The bed made, the toys organized on the shelves, the children's books lined up. Holden took a deep breath, his heart beating faster. He approached the shelf and his fingers touched a brown teddy bear, almost new. Lucas had received it just a few days before the accident and had barely had time to play with it. "Would you mind?" he asked in a low voice, as if his son could hear him. "There's a little girl who might like him." There was no answer, of course. Just the silence of the empty room, but somehow Holden felt it was the right thing to do. 2 hours later, he was standing in front of Leah and Hazel's building, holding the bear wrapped in colorful gift paper. He had thought about turning back several times on the way. What was he doing? He barely knew these people. He had only spent one evening with them. Maybe they didn't even want to see him again. Before he could change his mind, he pressed the intercom button. "Who is it?" Leah's voice sounded distant and wary. "It's Holden, from last night." There was a moment of silence, and he almost turned around, regretting the idea. Then the intercom crackled again. "Third floor, apartment 302. The building door is open." Climbing the stairs, Holden felt his heart race. What would he say? Did Hazel really like him, or did she just feel sorry for the lonely man on the park bench? And Leah, would she approve of this visit, or had she only tolerated his presence the night before because of her daughter's insistence? Before he could knock, the door opened. Hazel was standing there with a smile that seemed to light up the entire hallway. "You came back." The joy in her voice was so genuine that it dispelled all of Holden's doubts in an instant. "I said I would," he replied, feeling strangely light. "Mom! Mom! Holden's back!" Hazel shouted, jumping with excitement. Then, as if remembering something important, she assumed a serious posture, mimicking an adult. "Please, come in." Holden smiled and entered the apartment. It was different seeing it in the daylight. Rays of sun streamed through the windows, highlighting the bright colors of the drawings on the walls and the plants on the windowsill. The place seemed even more alive than the night before. Leah appeared at the kitchen doorway, drying her hands on a dish towel. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore a floral apron. There was a smudge of flour on her cheek. "Good morning," she said, her tone polite but cautious. "We weren't expecting visitors today." "Sorry to show up unannounced," Holden replied. "I just wanted to, well," he held out the package to Hazel. "Merry Christmas." The girl's eyes widened. "For me, a Christmas present." Leah looked like she was about to protest, but Hazel's expression stopped her. The girl took the gift as if it were made of crystal. "Can I open it, Mom?" Leah nodded, her eyes shifting from Holden to her daughter. There was an unasked question there, a natural suspicion. After all, who was this man who showed up with a gift for her daughter after just one evening? Hazel tore the paper carefully, unlike most children who would have destroyed the wrapping in seconds. When the brown teddy bear appeared, she let out a cry of joy. "A teddy bear! Look, Mom, he's so cute." Hazel hugged the bear tightly. "I'm going to name him Brownie. Like those cakes you make." "It's a very beautiful gift," Leah said, her gaze meeting Holden's. "You shouldn't have." There was something in the subtext of that sentence, a concern, a single mother living on limited resources, suddenly confronted with someone who could give her daughter things she couldn't. "It was no trouble," Holden replied, understanding the unspoken worry. "Actually, I had this bear stored away. I thought he'd be better off with someone who could give him the attention he deserves." Something in the tone of his voice must have communicated more than his words, because Leah's gaze softened slightly. "Thank you," she said simply. "Come on, Holden," Hazel exclaimed, pulling him by the hand. "I'm going to introduce Brownie to my other toys." The other toys were few: a rag doll with yarn hair, some worn wooden blocks, and an incomplete set of colored pens. But Hazel spoke of them as if they were treasures, introducing each one with the seriousness of a museum curator. And to her, they probably were treasures. Holden sat on the floor of the small room that Hazel shared with her mother. There were 2 beds, a double bed, and a smaller mattress in the corner that clearly belonged to the girl. The space was divided by a colorful rug that marked Hazel's territory. There she created her own world. "This is Mr. Buttons," she said, showing him the rag doll. "He's a scientist, and these," pointing to the blocks, "are his helpers in the laboratory." "And what are they researching?" Holden asked, playing along. Hazel thought for a moment, frowning seriously. "They're looking for a time machine." "A time machine? What for?" "To visit dinosaurs, of course," she replied as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Holden laughed, a light laugh, a bit rusty from disuse, but genuine. He couldn't remember the last time he had laughed like that. For the next hour, they built Mr. Buttons's laboratory with the wooden blocks, drew blueprints for the time machine, and created stories about the adventures Brownie, the new bear, would have with the other toys. Leah appeared at the door a few times, as if checking to see if everything was okay, but she didn't interrupt. Holden caught her watching him with an intrigued expression, as if trying to figure out who this man who had appeared out of nowhere in their lives really was. One of those times, their eyes met, and he tried to convey with a simple smile that his intentions were good, that he posed no danger. That, perhaps, he needed this connection as much as Hazel seemed to enjoy his company. After some time, Leah called them for a snack. There were homemade cookies and hot chocolate. Sitting at the kitchen table, Holden noticed the sweet smell in the air. "Are you baking something?" he asked. "Cakes," Leah replied. "I make them to sell." She didn't elaborate, and he didn't press. There was a quiet pride in her tone, the kind of pride of someone who does what needs to be done, without complaining. "Mommy makes the best cakes in the world," Hazel declared, biting into a cookie. "Everyone says so." "I'm sure she does," Holden smiled. After the snack, when they returned to the living room, Hazel ran to a small bookshelf improvised from wooden crates. She pulled out a book with a worn cover. "Look, Holden, I'm learning to read." The book was an old reading primer, with yellowed pages and folded corners. Some letters were handwritten in the margins, as if someone had been practicing. "Hazel isn't in school yet," Leah explained, standing at the entrance to the room, "but she's very curious." There was something in her voice, a mixture of pride and guilt, as if she felt she was failing her daughter by not being able to put her in school yet. "Mom's not working right now," Hazel said with the directness of children. "She bakes cakes to sell." "I wanted to go to school. Mom says one day I will." Leah looked away, a blush rising up her neck. Holden noticed her discomfort at having her financial situation exposed like that, but before he could say anything, Hazel continued. "But I already know some letters. Look." She opened the book to a page with a drawing of a house. "This is the letter H for house and horse." "And," she frowned, thinking, "heart." "Very good," Holden praised, genuinely impressed. "You're very smart." "And this is the letter B for ball and bear and cake, like Mom's." Holden sat next to her on the sofa and let her show him every letter she knew. There were only a few, but she recited them with such pride that she might as well have been reading Shakespeare. As he listened, Holden felt something strange in his chest, an emotion he hadn't experienced in a long time. It was as if a rusty door in his heart was being slowly pushed open, creaking from years of disuse. Lucas had loved books. From a very young age, he would ask for stories before bed. He had been enrolled in preschool at 4 and was already learning to put letters together when Holden took a deep breath, pushing the memory away. Not today. Today he just wanted to be present, here with this little girl who, for some inexplicable reason, had decided he was worth it. "So, can you teach me more?" Hazel asked, her eyes shining with hope. "I'd love to," he replied, surprised by his own sincerity. Across the room, Leah watched in silence. Her arms were crossed, a defensive posture, but her eyes reflected an internal battle. The natural wariness of a mother, but also, perhaps, the reluctant hope that her daughter might have found someone to help her in a way that she herself couldn't at the moment. When it was getting dark, Holden realized it was time to go. He had spent almost the entire day there, something he hadn't planned when he left home that morning. At the door, as he said goodbye, he felt a hesitation. A part of him wanted to return to his silent apartment, to the comfort of the isolation he had built around himself for the past few years. But another part, a part he thought had been dead for a long time, wanted to come back the next day and the next and the next. "Can I come back tomorrow?" he asked him, surprising himself. Leah looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to see beyond the surface. Then her eyes turned to Hazel, who was hugging Brownie and looking at Holden with expectation. "If Hazel wants you to," she finally replied. The smile that lit up the girl's face was answer enough. As he walked down the building stairs, Holden felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't exactly happiness. That word seemed too big, too heavy for what he deserved to feel. It was more like purpose. As if, for the first time in 2 years, there was a reason for tomorrow to come. And a bond, fragile and new like a bud in spring, was beginning to grow. Holden's visits became part of the routine. 3 weeks had passed since Christmas, and almost every day he would show up in the late afternoon with a children's book or school supplies for Hazel. The girl progressed quickly in her improvised lessons. She already recognized almost all the letters and was starting to form simple words. On that January afternoon, snow was falling in fine flakes outside. Holden and Hazel were sitting at the kitchen table. She was writing her name on a sheet of paper, her tongue stuck between her teeth in a gesture of concentration. "Look, Holden, I wrote it without any mistakes." "Very good," he smiled, genuinely proud. "You learn fast." Leah had gone out to deliver some cake orders, leaving the two of them alone for the first time. "I'll be back in half an hour," she had said, still hesitant, but now trusting Holden enough for this small test. Hazel put down her pencil and looked at him with that direct curiosity only children possess. "Holden, do you have a son?" The question came without warning, like a punch to the gut. Holden felt the air leave his lungs. In all his visits, he had avoided talking about himself, deflecting personal questions with vague answers or changing the subject. "Why do you ask?" he managed to say after a moment. Hazel shrugged, swinging her feet that didn't reach the floor. "Because you're good at teaching, and you brought that nice bear. And sometimes you look at me with a sad look in your eyes." Holden lowered his eyes to the table. It was incredible how a 5-year-old could be so perceptive. Part of him wanted to get up and leave, to return to the cocoon of isolation he had built. It would be easier, safer. But something in Hazel's open and sincere expression made it impossible to run away, and maybe, he thought, after keeping everything bottled up for so long, it was time to let the truth out, even just a piece of it. "Yes," he finally answered, his voice barely a whisper. "I had a son." "Had?" Hazel tilted her head, immediately catching the past tense. "Where is he now?" The clock on the wall suddenly seemed to tick louder, tick-tock, tick-tock, each second marking the rhythm of the pain Holden felt in his chest. "His name was Lucas," he said, the words coming out with difficulty. "He died at Christmas. It's been 2 years." The silence that followed felt dense, almost physical. Outside, the snow continued to fall, indifferent to the confession that had just taken place in that small kitchen. Holden expected to see pity in Hazel's eyes, or perhaps fear. Death is a difficult concept for children, but instead, she just looked at him with an understanding that seemed far beyond her 5 years. "How old was he?" she asked softly. 6. Almost 7. Hazel absorbed the information in silence, as if piecing together a puzzle in her mind. Then, without warning, she got down from her chair and walked over to him. Holden remained still, unsure what to expect. Gently, she took his hand, so small compared to his, and placed it on his chest. "I think he's still with you, right here," she said simply. Something broke inside Holden at that moment. It wasn't like a violent collapse, but like a wall that after years of pressure finally gave way. Silent, almost peaceful, but irrevocable. Tears he had held back for so long began to stream down his face. He didn't try to hide them or wipe them away. He simply let them fall, each one carrying a fragment of the pain he had kept locked inside. Hazel didn't pull away or seem frightened. She stood there, her hand still on his, like a small anchor in the storm. "Do you miss him a lot?" she asked. Holden nodded, unable to speak. "My friend Sophia moved to another city. I miss her. But Mommy said that missing someone is the love that stays behind when a person leaves." The simplicity of the explanation hit Holden like a revelation. That was it. The love that stays. All this time, he had interpreted the pain as a punishment, as something to be avoided, hidden, drowned. He had never thought of it as proof that love still existed. "Your mother is wise," he finally said, his voice hoarse. In the hallway, invisible to both of them, Leah stood with a hand covering her mouth. She had returned minutes earlier, but had stopped upon hearing the conversation. She didn't want to interrupt that moment, instinctively sensing its importance. Silent tears streamed down her face as well as she watched her daughter, so small, so strong, confront an adult's pain with the wisdom only innocence can provide. Holden took a deep breath, trying to regain control. "I'm sorry," he murmured, running a hand over his face. "I didn't mean to cry in front of you." "It's okay," Hazel shrugged. "Mommy says crying washes your soul, like taking a bath, but on the inside..." A faint smile appeared on Holden's face. "Lucas liked dinosaurs," he said suddenly, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. He knew all their names, even the hardest ones, like Tyrannosaurus rex. That one and many others, Diplodocus, Triceratops, Velociraptor. He would correct me when I pronounced them wrong. It was done. For the first time in 2 years, Holden had said his son's name out loud without feeling like his chest would implode. He had shared a happy memory, not just the final tragedy. "I bet he was cool," said Hazel. "He was," Holden nodded, feeling the knot in his throat loosen a bit. "Very cool." Hazel went back to her chair and picked up her pencil again. With concentration returning to her childish face, she began to draw something on the sheet of paper. Holden watched in silence, grateful for the natural change of subject, for the way she let him breathe after such an intense moment. After a few minutes, she turned the paper towards him. It was a simple drawing, made with childish strokes, 2 stick figures, one large and one small, holding hands. "It's you and Lucas," she explained. "You're together, even if we can't see him." Holden took the drawing with trembling hands. Such a simple gift, and yet so profound. He looked at Hazel, at this child who, without knowing it, was mending the broken pieces of his heart. "Thank you," he said, the word carrying much more than simple gratitude. In the hallway, Leah silently backed away, wiping her own tears. Something had changed. That broken man who had appeared on Christmas Eve was not a threat, as she had initially feared. He was just someone trying to find his way back to life, just as she herself had tried to do so many times. And maybe, the idea timidly formed in her mind, maybe they could help each other on this journey. The next morning, Holden awoke with a strange sensation. The conversation with Hazel about Lucas was still vivid in his mind. After 2 years of avoiding any mention of his son, he had spoken about him, shared memories, and the world hadn't ended. The sky hadn't fallen on his head. In fact, he felt lighter, as if he had left a small part of the weight behind. As he got ready to leave, he realized he was planning his routine around his visits to Leah and Hazel's home. His life, which once revolved only around absence, now had a new axis. The realization startled him a little. That afternoon, he arrived at their apartment with a package of cookies and an illustrated alphabet book. Hazel greeted him with her usual enthusiasm, as if each visit were a wonderful surprise, even after weeks of almost daily contact. "Look, Mommy." Holden brought a new book. Leah smiled at her daughter, but there was something different in her eyes when she turned to Holden, a kind of resolution, as if she had made a difficult decision. "Hazel, honey, why don't you go put the book in your corner? I need to talk to Holden for a bit." The girl looked from one to the other, sensing the seriousness in the air, but she obeyed without protest. When she disappeared down the hallway, Leah motioned to the small kitchen table. "Can we sit?" Holden nodded, a knot forming in his stomach. He knew that tone. It was the kind of conversation that usually ended with, "Maybe it's better if you don't come back anymore." The kitchen was impeccably clean as always. On the counter, 3 freshly baked cakes were cooling, filling the air with a sweet aroma. A stack of folded boxes indicated they would be packaged and delivered later. "You heard our conversation yesterday, didn't you?" Holden asked as soon as they sat down, surprising Leah. She hesitated, then nodded. "Part of it. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but it's okay. It wasn't a secret." Leah took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "Holden, what's happening here?" The question hung between them, simple and yet so complex. What was really happening? A man broken by loss meets a child and her mother on Christmas Eve, and suddenly becomes part of their lives. It sounded like the plot of a cheap movie, not something that happened in real life. "I'm not sure," he answered honestly. "Hazel gets attached easily," Leah said, her fingers drumming nervously on the table. "She's always been like that. She sees the best in people, even when there's not much to see." She paused, choosing her words. "She talks about you all the time. Holden said this. Holden taught me that." Holden felt a wave of warmth in his chest, followed by a pang of guilt. He hadn't planned on becoming so important in a child's life, not when his own life was in shambles. "Hazel gets attached," Leah continued, now looking directly into his eyes. "If you disappear, how do I explain it to her?" The question wasn't an accusation, Holden realized. It was the genuine fear of a mother trying to protect her child. Leah must have seen enough people come and go in their lives to fear another abandonment. "I'm not going to disappear," he said, the conviction in his voice surprising them both. "How can you be so sure? You barely know us. We're practically strangers you met by chance." "I don't believe in chance," Holden replied, the words coming out before he could analyze them. "I was not after that night." Leah crossed her arms, a physical barrier to complement the emotional ones that already existed. "What do you want from us, Holden? What are you looking for here?" The question caught him off guard, not because of its harshness, but because of the impossibility of a simple answer. What did he want from them? Redemption? Solace? A chance to feel useful again? All of those reasons seemed too selfish to admit. "I didn't expect this," he said finally, opting for raw honesty. "I didn't expect to care about you. I didn't expect to want to be here every day. I didn't expect—" He paused, searching for the right words. "For the last 2 years, I've just existed. I breathed because my body insisted on functioning, even when I saw no point in it." His eyes met Leah's. "But with you, I actually breathe, like there's finally enough air in the world." The silence that followed was heavy, but not hostile. Leah studied him as if trying to decipher a complex code. "I understand your concern," Holden continued. If I had a daughter, I would also be cautious of a stranger who appeared out of nowhere." He took a deep breath. "If you want me to stay away, I'll understand. It will hurt, but I'll understand." Leah looked away towards the window, where the snow was falling slowly. "Hazel lost her father before she was even born," she said after a moment. "He just decided he wasn't ready to be a dad and disappeared. We never heard from him again." There was a hardness in her voice, not of resentment, but of someone who had learned to live with reality. "It's been just the 2 of us since then. We have a routine, a system that works, despite all the difficulties." Holden nodded, understanding the subtext. "We don't need anyone to mess this up." But yesterday, she continued, her voice softer, when I heard you two talking, I realized something. Her eyes met his again. You're not pretending to care about her. You really do care. More than I thought possible, Holden admitted. Leah didn't smile, but something in her expression changed, as if a small crack had opened in the wall she had built. I'm not asking for guarantees, she said. I know life is too unpredictable for that. I just want honesty. If one day you feel you don't want to continue, that it's too much, let me know beforehand, so I can prepare, Hazel. Holden felt the weight of that request. It was fair, more than fair. I promise, he said simply. Leah nodded, as if they had sealed a silent agreement. It wasn't exactly trust yet, but it was a start. She didn't smile, but she didn't push him away either. It was the most he could hope for at that moment. In the weeks that followed, a new routine was established. Holden continued to visit almost daily, but now there was a tacit understanding between him and Leah. A mutual respect that grew slowly. He began to pay more attention to their practical needs. He noticed how Leah struggled to keep everything running with limited resources, how she stretched every dollar, always prioritizing Hazel's needs over her own. One afternoon, after hearing Leah mention that she needed to go to the market but might put it off until the next day because of the bad weather, Holden had an idea. On his way to their apartment, he stopped at a grocery store and bought some basic items. Milk, bread, eggs, fruit, nothing extravagant, just enough to spare Leah from going out in the forming storm. When he arrived and handed her the bag, he saw the hesitation in her eyes, pride fighting against practical need. It's just to keep you from going out in this rain, he explained, trying not to sound condescending. It's nothing. After a moment, Leah accepted the bag with a silent thank you. It wasn't charity. They both knew that. It was just a gesture of consideration. That was the first of many small gestures, always discreet, always respectful. When he noticed the sugar was running low, he brought a new bag on his next visit. When he saw that Hazel's notebook was almost full, he showed up with a new one. Once, he brought a small pot of violets. To brighten up the kitchen, he said. They were never expensive gifts or flashy declarations of help. They were just small contributions to make life a little easier. With Hazel, the progress was even more visible. The improvised lessons were beginning to bear fruit. The girl already recognized all the letters and was forming simple words. Her enthusiasm was contagious, especially when she managed to read an entire sentence on her own. Look, Mummy, I read it all by myself. The pride on Leah's face on those occasions was indescribable. And Holden noticed that, more and more often, that pride included a look of gratitude in his direction. One afternoon, after a particularly successful reading session, Leah surprised Holden by offering him a slice of the cake she had just made. It's a new recipe, she explained. I need opinions before I offer it to customers. It was a transparent excuse. The cake was obviously perfect, but Holden accepted with a smile, recognizing the gesture for what it was, a small step towards trust. As they ate cake in the small kitchen, with Hazel excitedly chattering about a cartoon she had seen on TV, Holden watched Leah discreetly. There was something different about her. The constant tension in her shoulders seemed to have eased a bit. She smiled more, not just at Hazel, but in general, as if she were allowing herself moments of lightness. What is it? She asked, noticing his gaze. Nothing, Holden replied. Just thinking that the cake is really delicious. Leah gave a small smile. The kind of smile that isn't planned, that just happens. Thank you. That evening, as he said goodbye, Holden realized that something fundamental had changed. Leah walked him to the door, as she always did, but instead of the usual formal wave, she briefly touched his arm. Thank you, she said in a low voice, so Hazel wouldn't hear from the living room. For what you've been doing for her. The books, the lessons, it makes a difference. Holden nodded, feeling the warmth of that small touch long after he had left the apartment. On his way home under the starry winter sky, he reflected on how much his life had changed in such a short time. 2 months ago, he was an isolated man drowning in his own pain, unable to see beyond the loss that consumed him. Now, there were 2 people who waited for him, who noticed his presence, who who cared whether he showed up or not. It wasn't a miraculous cure. The pain of losing Lucas was still there, a constant presence in his chest. But now there was something else too. A small light, fragile as a candle flame but persistent. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was still a path forward. And for the first time in 2 years, Holden allowed himself to consider that maybe this path didn't have to be walked alone. The key felt heavy in Holden's pocket the entire way back from Leah and Hazel's apartment. It was an ordinary Thursday, but something felt different. During dinner, Hazel had read an entire story by herself, a small children's book with simple sentences, but a huge accomplishment for a 5-year-old who was learning on her own. The pride he felt was so intense it almost hurt. "I'd make a great teacher," Leah had commented as they washed the dishes, with Hazel already asleep on the sofa. "I'm just helping her discover what she already knows," he had replied, and Leah had smiled in that new, more open way that had emerged in recent weeks. Now standing in front of the door at the end of his apartment hallway, Holden turned the small key between his fingers. That door had remained locked for 2 years. Not even the monthly cleaning lady was allowed to enter. It was a shrine, a tomb, a piece of time he refused to let pass. Lucas's room. He took a deep breath. He hadn't planned to do this today. In fact, he had never planned to do it, but something about the genuine joy he felt seeing Hazel read, something about the feeling that maybe, just maybe, it was possible to feel again without the pain shattering him, had brought him here. The key slid into the lock with a soft click. He turned it slowly, as if any sudden movement could break the spell that preserved that space. The door opened with a slight creak, protesting its disuse. The smell was the first thing that hit him, that unique mix of crayons, the special detergent he used to wash the teddy bears, and something indefinable that was simply Lucas. For a moment, it felt as if his son could come running in at any moment, asking to play ball, or for one more story before bed. Holden turned on the light. The room was exactly as it was on the day of the accident. The bed made with his favorite dinosaur comforter, the bookshelf with books lined up and toys organized. On the small desk by the window, an unfinished drawing of a Tyrannosaurus. Lucas had intended to finish it when they got back from that Christmas trip, but they never came back. Not both of them, at least. Holden took 2 hesitant steps inside. Time had truly stood still in this room. Not a speck of dust, thanks to the cleaning lady who cleaned the room from the outside, without entering, just using a long-distance vacuum. No changes, no sign that 2 years had passed in the rest of the world. He slowly approached the bookshelf. There, among the children's books and dinosaur models, was the photograph, one of the last ones taken together on Lucas's 6th birthday. The boy was smiling, cheeks puffed out to blow out the candles, while Holden, right behind him, looked at his son with an expression of pure love. His fingers trembled slightly as he picked up the picture frame. The image was so vivid, so present. Lucas with his smile missing a front tooth, his brown hair messy as always, his eyes shining with happiness. So full of life, so real. Holden sat on the edge of the small bed, the mattress sinking under his weight. The picture frame in his hands felt heavier than it should. For 2 years, he had avoided looking at any photos of Lucas. The few scattered around the apartment had been turned face down or stored in drawers. Looking at them was like reopening a wound that never healed. But now, here he was, looking directly at his son's face. And strangely, he didn't feel the usual sharp pang of pain that used to accompany any memory. In its place, there was something different, something softer, warmer. "Hi, champ," he whispered to the photograph, his voice hoarse from the lump in his throat. The silence of the room enveloped him. There, in that small space preserved from the outside world, he felt as if he were truly talking to Lucas, not just to an image. "I miss you every day," he continued, running his finger over the smiling face in the photo. "Not a minute goes by that I don't think of you." Tears began to form, but he didn't try to hold them back. He let them stream freely down his face. "I haven't been very good since you've been gone. In fact, I don't even know if I've really been here. Just existing, you know? Like a ghost." The wind gently moved the curtain, allowing a sliver of light from the street lamp to enter, and create patterns on the bedroom floor. But something strange happened. "Champ," Holden said, feeling strangely lighter as he spoke the words. "I met a little girl. Her name is Hazel. She's 5, almost 6. Smart like you were. Braver too." A faint smile formed on his lips. "She invited me to spend Christmas with her and her mum. Can you imagine? A little girl inviting a sad stranger to Christmas dinner. Sounds like something out of a movie, doesn't it?" Holden wiped a tear with the back of his hand but kept staring at the photo. "She's learning to read now. I'm helping her. Today she managed to read a whole book by herself. You should have seen her smile. It reminded me so much of you when you learned to tie your own shoes. Remember, you practiced for hours, refusing any help." The memory brought more tears, but these didn't burn like acid as they used to. They were softer, almost comforting. "Champ," Holden took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "I met a little girl who's helping Dad learn to live again." Saying that out loud was like releasing something that had been trapped inside him for a long time, a confession, an acceptance. "For a long time I thought that living again would be a betrayal to you. As if, by feeling anything other than pain, I was leaving you behind." He shook his head slightly. "But it's not like that, is it? You would never have wanted that for me." The tears now flowed freely, but there was something different about them. They weren't tears of despair, of irreparable loss. They were tears of longing, yes, but a longing mixed with love, with gratitude for the time they had together. A good kind of missing. "You taught me so much in such a short time, son. And now, this little girl is teaching me something new. That maybe it's possible to carry you with me without drowning in the pain." Holden sat there on his son's bed for a long time, talking softly, sometimes laughing at a funny memory, sometimes crying again. And for the first time in 2 years, he felt he wasn't talking to a ghost, but to a living part of himself, a part that Lucas would always occupy, not as an open wound, but as a light. When he finally stood up, he placed the photo back on the shelf, but not in the exact same spot. He positioned it a little more to the front, where it could be seen clearly from the door. "I'll be back soon," he promised, looking around one last time before turning off the light. As he closed the door, he didn't lock it. Spring arrived with an explosion of color, replacing the white winter landscape with shades of green and flowers blooming on the city's trees. Nearly 4 months had passed since the Christmas Eve, when Holden had met Leah and Hazel. On that sunny April morning, Holden walked through the city center with a purpose. After weeks of hearing Leah talk about how her cakes were becoming a hit with customers, but how difficult it was to expand the business, working only by order from her small apartment kitchen, an idea began to form in his mind. The opportunity arose when he passed a small shop on the corner of Main Street and Cherry Street. The space, which had once housed a stationery store, had been closed for a few months. For rent sign was posted on the dusty shop window. It was small but well located, exactly what he was looking for. Holden jotted down the phone number and, later that morning, contacted the owner. The conversation was brief and productive. The rent was reasonable, especially considering the location, and the lease could be month to month for the first 6 months, reducing the initial risk. That afternoon, when he arrived at Leah and Hazel's apartment, he was unusually nervous. Hazel greeted him with her usual enthusiasm, immediately showing him the new book she was managing to read. Something about a very hungry little caterpillar. "You seem different today," Leah observed as she prepared tea in the kitchen after Hazel had gone to play in her room. "Did something happen?" "Actually, yes," Holden replied, gathering his courage. "There's something I want to talk to you about. An idea." Leah sat down at the kitchen table, placing 2 steaming cups between them. Over the past few months, she had become more relaxed in his presence. Her hair, once always in a tight bun, now fell loosely over her shoulders. Even her posture was different, less defensive, more open. "I'm listening," she said, a faint smile on her lips. "I found a place," Holden began, the words coming out a bit jumbled. "A small shop for rent, near downtown. It's perfect, Leah. It has a big storefront facing the main street, lots of natural light, and a small but functional kitchen in the back." Leah frowned, confused. A shop. For what? For your cakes, he replied simply. We could open a shop for you to sell your cakes. A small cafe, maybe. Nothing too elaborate at first. A few tables, a refrigerated display case for the cakes, fresh coffee. He stopped when he saw Leah's expression change from confusion to something close to shock. Holden, she said slowly, that's a lot. A commercial rent, equipment, licenses, I can't accept. It's not a gift, he clarified quickly. It's an investment. Your cakes are incredible, Leah. Everyone who tries them says so. You have real talent, and you're wasting that talent just selling by order. Limited by your kitchen's capacity. Leah looked down at her cup, visibly conflicted. Even so, it's a lot of money. What if it doesn't work out? What if no one shows up? It might not work, Holden admitted. Any business can fail, but it could also be very successful, and the lease is month to month for the first 6 months, so the risk is limited. An additional idea struck him as he spoke. Besides, there's enough space for a small children's bookshelf in a corner. We could create a kids' area, where parents could have coffee while their children explore the books. That caught Leah's attention. Holden knew how much she valued education, how much she wished Hazel could have every possible opportunity. A cafe with books, she asked, a spark of interest in her eyes. Exactly. Sweet pages, or something like that, he suggested. Cakes and books, 2 things that bring comfort. Leah was silent for a long moment, absorbing the idea. Holden could almost see the gears turning in her mind, assessing risks, calculating possibilities, allowing herself, perhaps for the first time in a long time, to dream of something bigger. Why would you do this? She finally asked, her voice almost a whisper. The question caught Holden off guard. Why? Because for the past few months, for the first time since Lucas's death, he felt alive again. Because watching Hazel learn to read had given him purpose. Because Leah's smile, increasingly frequent, brightened days that were once just a succession of empty hours. Because you deserve it, he answered simply, and because maybe I need this as much as you do. Something in Leah's face softened. It was more than acceptance, it was understanding. For the first time, she truly saw him, not as a potential threat, not as a broken stranger who had appeared out of nowhere, but as someone who was just as lost as she was finding his way back. Can we at least go see the place? She asked, a hesitant smile appearing. 3 weeks later, the small corner shop was transformed. The walls, once grey, now sported a soft shade of blue. Wooden shelves lined an entire wall, housing carefully selected children's books. In the center, 4 round tables with comfortable chairs, and in the back, a refrigerated display case showed off Leah's cakes, each one more beautiful and appetizing than the last. The grand opening of Sweet Pages was set for Saturday. Leah had spent the entire week preparing her best recipes. Holden had taken care of the paperwork, licenses, contracts, insurance. Even Hazel had contributed, creating small, colorful bookmarks for the first customers. When the doors opened at 10 in the morning, there was a small line waiting outside. Curious neighbors, Leah's old customers, families attracted by the concept of a cafe with a children's area. The morning passed in a blur of activity. Leah, initially nervous, soon found her rhythm, moving confidently between the counter and the kitchen. Holden helped serve tables and manage the cash register. Hazel, proud in her little apron, handed out bookmarks and guided children to the reading corner. By noon, the cake display was almost empty. At 3 in the afternoon, Leah had to improvise 2 more recipes to meet the demand. At 5, when they closed the doors, they were exhausted, but radiant. That was incredible, Leah said, collapsing into a chair after the last customer left. I never imagined. So many people. Holden smiled, looking at the space that hours before was just a promise and now felt alive, as if it had always existed. They'll come back, and they'll bring more people. Hazel, sleepy after the day's excitement, rested her head on her mother's lap. Can we do this every day? She asked, yawning. Yes, honey, Leah replied, stroking her daughter's hair. This is our place now. She looked up at Holden, and there was something new in her gaze, a mix of gratitude, tenderness, and something more, something he didn't dare to name yet. "It was a very good thing you came into our lives," she said simply. Holden felt a warmth spread through his chest. It wasn't just the satisfaction of seeing a project succeed. It was deeper, more essential. It was the feeling of belonging to something again, of being part of someone's life, of mattering. The bond was real now. It was no longer about a broken man finding temporary refuge, nor a single mother reluctantly accepting help. It was a genuine connection, built day by day, gesture by gesture, moment by moment. As the sun set outside, casting a golden glow through the shop windows, Holden knew, with a certainty he hadn't felt in years, that he had found his way back. Sweet Pages was completing its first month with a success that surprised even Holden. The small shop was always busy, especially on weekends, when entire families would come to try Leah's cakes and let their children explore the colorful books in the reading corner. It was a sunny Sunday in May. Spring had arrived in full force, transforming the city. After helping Leah close the shop at noon on Sundays, they only worked in the morning, Holden had an idea. "How about a walk in the park this afternoon?" he suggested as they walked back to the apartment. "The day is perfect." "Yes," Hazel exclaimed immediately, jumping with excitement. "Can we bring bread for the ducks?" Leah smiled, the kind of smile that now appeared more frequently on her face. "I have a few things to organize for tomorrow," she said. "But you two can go. It'll do Hazel good to get some sun after being in the shop all morning." 2 hours later, Holden and Hazel were walking along the winding paths of the city's central park. It was a large space, with a small lake, grassy areas perfect for picnics, and a colorful playground where children ran and shouted joyfully. Hazel held Holden's hand with the confidence of someone who knows the way. In recent months, he had become a constant presence in her life, not a substitute for the father she never knew, but something equally important, a friend, a mentor, a person who saw her completely. "Look at the ducklings," she exclaimed, pointing to a family of ducks swimming peacefully in the lake. They approached the edge, and Hazel threw small pieces of the bread they had brought. Her eyes sparkled with excitement every time a duck came near to grab the food. "Do you think they're a family?" she asked, watching the ducks. "How's the daddy, the mommy, and the little babies?" "Probably," Holden replied, noticing how her mind always sought connections, always tried to understand the world through stories and relationships. After feeding the ducks, they continued walking until they found a large tree that provided generous shade. The spot offered a perfect view of the playground, where children of various ages played under the watchful eyes of their parents. "Should we rest for a bit?" Holden suggested, pointing to the grass under the tree. They sat side by side, their backs against the wide trunk. Hazel watched the children playing, a thoughtful expression on her small face. "What are you thinking about?" Holden asked. "Nothing," she shrugged. "I just like watching the other kids play." There was something in the way she said it, a kind of detachment, as if she were an observer, not a participant. Holden remembered Leah mentioning that before the shop, before him, Hazel didn't have much contact with other children. Without regular school, without many resources for extracurricular activities, she lived mostly in the small world of their apartment. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves above them, creating a dancing pattern of light and shadow on the ground. Holden felt something in his pocket, his wallet, which he had taken to buy ice cream later. As he pulled it out, a small photo slipped out, falling onto the grass between them. It was one of the few photos of Lucas he now carried with him. After that night in his son's room, he had decided that hiding him away was not the way to honor his memory. Hazel picked up the photo before he could reach it. "Who's this boy?" she asked, analyzing the image with curiosity. Holden hesitated for only a second. "That's Lucas, my son." Hazel looked from the photo to Holden and back to the photo. "He looks like you. He has the same smile." "People always said that," Holden smiled softly. It was strange how he could now talk about Lucas without feeling that gut-wrenching pain. It still hurt, of course, but it was a pain he could carry. The photo showed Lucas in the last summer before the accident. He was wearing a blue t-shirt with a dinosaur on it, his birthday present that year, and smiling broadly at the camera, showing off the gap left by a recently lost baby tooth. "He seems nice," Hazel commented, still studying the photo. "He was," Holden confirmed. "Very nice. He loved books, just like you. And dinosaurs. He knew all their names." Hazel kept looking at the photo for a few more moments, her brow furrowed as if trying to decipher a difficult word. Then, something in her expression changed, a kind of slow recognition dawning in her eyes. "I met him," she said suddenly, her voice surprisingly calm. Holden felt as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. "What?" "I met him," Hazel repeated, more confidently now. "He helped me once. He was wearing this shirt." Her small finger pointed to the blue t-shirt with the dinosaur. The world around Holden seemed to fall silent. Even the shouts of the children on the playground sounded distant now, as if coming from another universe. He felt a ringing in his ears, his heart racing so fast it felt like it would escape his chest. "You met my son?" he asked, the words coming out choppy. "How? When?" Hazel thought for a moment, the innocence on her face contrasting with the gravity of the moment. "It was at Christmas, I think. It was really cold. Mom and I were at the bus stop. I dropped my mitten and the wind blew it away. I ran after it, but I couldn't catch it." She paused, gathering memories that, for a child her age, likely seemed distant and hazy. "Then this boy got my mitten. He ran faster than me. He gave it back and smiled. He was wearing this blue shirt with the dinosaur. I remember because I really liked the drawing." Holden was paralyzed. The Christmas from 2 years ago, the day of the accident. They were coming back from a visit to Lucas's grandmother when the car skidded on the icy road. But before that, they had stopped in town to buy a last-minute gift. Lucas had left the store for a few minutes, saying he had seen something through the window. When he came back, Holden didn't ask where he had been. They were late, worried about the snow that was beginning to fall harder. "Did he say anything?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Hazel nodded. "He said, 'Take good care of this mitten. For it's very cold today.'" She smiled at the memory. He was kind. Holden felt tears forming, but he didn't try to stop them. It was too much to be a coincidence. On that last day, in those last hours, Lucas had crossed paths with Hazel, and 2 years later, by some whim of fate, Hazel had crossed his... "I never told Mommy," Hazel continued, watching Holden's reaction with attentive eyes. "She always says not to talk to strangers, but he didn't seem like a stranger. He seemed like a friend." Holden couldn't speak. The tears now streamed freely down his face, but they weren't tears of pain. They were of awe, of reverence before the inexplicable. Hazel placed her small hand on his. "I think he sent me to find you," she said with the simple certainty only a child can have. Suddenly, everything seemed to make sense. The unexpected invitation on Christmas Eve, the immediate connection with Hazel, the constant feeling that he was being guided back to life, even when he believed there was no way back. "Maybe he did," Holden agreed, his voice thick with emotion. The wind stirred again, stronger this time, making the trees' leaves dance and sending a shower of small white petals down on them. For an instant, it felt as if the world itself was celebrating this revelation, this impossible connection between past and present. Holden looked up at the sky through the tree branches, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. The universe, which for so long had seemed cruel and meaningless, now showed a glimpse of its mysterious interconnectedness. The past and the present were intertwined, like the threads of a complex tapestry that can only be understood when seen in its entirety. July arrived, with a heat that turned afternoons in the park into water adventures for the children. Sweet Pages had become a popular meeting spot, especially in the mornings, when mothers and fathers brought their kids to enjoy Leah's cakes while browse books in the children's corner. Leah had hired an assistant for the busiest mornings, which allowed her to focus on creating new recipes. Her latest invention, a lemon cake with lavender icing, had been mentioned in the local paper, attracting even more customers. That Friday night, as they were closing the shop, Holden seemed distracted. His hands worked automatically, organizing the books the children had left out of place, but his thoughts were clearly elsewhere. "Everything okay?" Leah asked, noticing his unusual silence. "Yeah, just thinking about some things," he replied with a smile that wasn't entirely convincing. Since the revelation in the park 3 weeks ago, something had changed in Holden. Not in a negative way, quite the opposite. It was as if the unexpected connection between Lucas and Hazel had sealed something within him, filled a void he thought was impossible to fill. "I'll stop by your apartment later," he said, as they locked the shop door. "I have something to show Hazel." "Any clues what it is?" Leah asked, intrigued. "Die surprise," was all he replied. Hours later, the apartment's intercom buzzed. Hazel ran to answer, immediately recognizing Holden's voice. In recent months, his visits had become so frequent that the girl could identify him just by the way he rang the bell. "Holden's coming up, Mommy," she announced, bouncing with excitement. Leah smiled, watching her daughter. Sometimes she was still surprised by how quickly Holden had become part of their lives, an essential part, that seemed to have always been there. After what Hazel had told her about her encounter with Lucas, everything seemed to make even more sense, as if a greater force was guiding this unlikely connection. Soft knocks on the door announced his arrival. Hazel opened it immediately, almost jumping into his arms. "You took so long," she complained, although it hadn't been long since they said goodbye at the shop. "Sorry, Princess," he laughed, entering the apartment. "I had to stop by a few places first." It was then that Leah noticed the large bag he was carrying, a shopping bag from a city department store. Holden met her gaze, and there was something in his expression, a kind of nervousness mixed with anticipation. "What's in there?" asked Hazel, her natural curiosity immediately piqued. Holden placed the bag on the living room floor and knelt to be at Hazel's height. "Remember when you told me about your biggest dream?" he asked softly. Hazel frowned, thoughtful. "To have a unicorn?" Holden laughed. "No, the other dream, the one you told me on the second day we met." Hazel's eyes widened slightly in recognition. "To go to school like the other kids." He nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "That's the one." With a ceremonial gesture, Holden pulled the bag closer and began to take out the items one by one. First, a new backpack, light blue with silver stars, exactly the kind Hazel had admired in a shop window weeks ago. Then, carefully folded, a school uniform, a navy blue pleated skirt, a white shirt, and a sweater with an embroidered crest that Leah recognized immediately. It was from Westfield Elementary School, one of the best schools in the city. Finally, a pair of new sneakers, white and shiny, perfect for a child who would soon be running through the hallways of a real school. Hazel stared at the items with an expression of pure astonishment, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Her small hand reverently touched the fabric of the uniform, feeling the texture under her fingers. "Didn't you say you wanted to go to school?" Holden said, his voice soft in the silence that had settled in the room. "After the summer break, you'll be starting. First day of school, September 1st. For a moment, Hazel remained motionless, processing the words. Then, without warning, tears began to stream down her face. They weren't tears of sadness. Her smile was too wide for that. They were tears of a joy so intense it couldn't be contained in just a smile. She threw herself into Holden's arms with such force that she nearly knocked him over. "Thank you," she sobbed against his shoulder, her words choked with emotion. "Well, it's the best present in the world." Holden hugged her back, his own eyes moist. Over Hazel's shoulder, he met Leah's gaze. She was standing there, a hand covering her mouth, her eyes shining with unshed tears. He knew how much this meant to her. In the late-night conversations they now shared regularly after Hazel went to sleep, Leah had confessed how guilty she felt for not being able to offer her daughter the education she deserved, how she feared Hazel would fall behind, that her opportunities would be limited by their circumstances. "How?" she managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. "I spoke with the principal," Holden explained. "I told her about Hazel's talent, how she's already reading well above her level. They have a scholarship program for children with potential. She took a test last week when I said we were going to the toy store." "A test?" Leah looked confused. "Sire, but you didn't mention—" "We wanted it to be a surprise in case she didn't pass," Holden said. But she passed, with flying colors actually. The principal said she rarely sees such aptitude in a child who has never attended formal school. Hazel, still clinging to Holden, now looked at her mother with bright eyes. "Mommy, I'm going to school. I'm going to learn things every day, like the kids in the books." Leah approached, kneeling beside them. She gently touched her daughter's face, wiping away a tear with her thumb. "Yes, my love, you are." The emotion in her voice was palpable. Years of worry, a feeling like she was failing as a mother for not being able to provide this for her daughter, seemed to dissipate in that moment. Hazel picked up the uniform again, holding it against her body as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "Can I try it on now?" she asked, her voice trembling with excitement. "Say, of course you can," Leah smiled, helping her gather the items. "Go to your room, I'll help you in a minute." As soon as Hazel disappeared down the hallway, Leah turned to Holden. There were so many things she wanted to say, so many conflicting emotions. Gratitude, relief, maybe even a little guilt for not being able to do this herself. But before she could form any words, Holden spoke. "I know what you're going to say, and no, it's not too much. It's not charity. It's just life. People helping people they care about." Leah nodded, understanding. In the past few months, they had learned to read each other, to understand the silences and the unsaid. What once would have seemed like an intrusion or charity was now just the natural continuation of the bond they had formed. "Thank you," she said simply, letting that single word carry everything she felt. From the bedroom, they heard Hazel's excited voice calling for her mother, eager to try on the uniform. Leah stood up, holding back the tears that threatened to fall. They weren't tears of sadness or worry, like so many she had shed in the difficult years of raising a daughter alone. They were tears of relief, of hope, of a future that suddenly seemed full of possibilities. The new beginning had arrived, not just for Hazel, who would finally get the education she had always dreamed of, but for all of them. A new phase in their lives, intertwined by that unlikely invitation on a Christmas night. The headquarters of Harper Architecture stood imposingly in the city's financial district, a building of glass and steel that Holden himself had designed 8 years ago. Standing on the sidewalk in front of the building, he adjusted the tie he hadn't worn in so long. The suit still fit perfectly, but he felt strange in it, as if he were wearing someone else's skin. In a way, that's exactly what it was. The automatic doors slid open as he approached. In the lobby, the security guard, the same one as before, looked up without much interest. Then his eyes widened in recognition. "Mr. Harper." "My goodness, is that really you, sir?" Holden smiled, extending his hand. "Hello, Carl, it's been a while." 2 years and 3 months, sir," the man replied, shaking his hand enthusiastically. "It's very good to have you back. 2 years and 3 months. The exact time since he had last set foot here, 3 days after Lucas's funeral. On that day, he had only come in to announce his indefinite leave of absence, leaving the company in the hands of his partner, Martin. The elevator rose smoothly to the 10th floor. As the doors opened, Holden took a deep breath. The decision to return hadn't been easy, but in recent weeks, while helping to establish Sweet Pages and getting more involved in Leah and Hazel's life, he realized he was ready to reclaim this part of himself as well. The office looked almost the same glass walls separating the workstations, the same strategically placed plants, the same hum of activity. But now everything seemed different to his eyes, more alive, more full of possibilities. A few heads turned as he walked by. Whispers followed him down the hall. 2 years was long enough for some faces to be new, but most of the long-time employees recognized him immediately. No one approached him, though. Perhaps out of respect. Perhaps because they didn't know what to say to the man who had disappeared after losing his son. The door to his office still had his name engraved on the golden plaque. Holden Harper, CEO. He hesitated for a moment before turning the handle. The space had been preserved, like a museum awaiting its curator. Probably Martin's doing, who had always insisted that Holden would return when he was ready. The large oak desk, the ergonomic leather chair, the shelves with architecture books and scale models of his most famous projects. The only difference was the plants. All dead, of course. No one had remembered to water them during his absence. Or maybe someone had tried at first, but eventually gave up, accepting that some things simply don't survive neglect. Holden walked slowly around the room, reacquainting himself with the space. He ran his fingers over the surface of the desk, feeling the wood beneath his fingertips. He stopped in front of the panoramic window that offered a privileged view of the city. Down below, people walked, cars moved, life went on its relentless course. Before, this view made him feel distant, isolated from the world. Now, he saw connections. In every hurried person, he imagined stories, families, joys and sorrows, all intertwined like the threads of an immense invisible web. Finally, he sat in the swivel chair. The leather creaked softly under his weight. He took a small picture frame from his inside jacket pocket, the photo of Lucas he had shown Hazel in the park. Carefully, he placed it on the desk, adjusting the angle so he could see it clearly. In the smiling Lucas in the photo, he now saw not only what he had lost, but also the mysterious link that had led him to Hazel and Leah. That unlikely encounter on the day of the accident, the boy helping a little girl retrieve her wind-blown mitten, now seemed charged with meaning, as if the universe had planted a seed that would take 2 years to bloom. The door opened after a light knock. Martin, his longtime partner, entered with an expression of surprise and restrained joy. The receptionist called me. I didn't believe it, he said, approaching with hesitant steps. You're back. Holden nodded, standing up to hug the friend who had sustained the business during his absence. I'm back. They talked for almost an hour. Holden explained his intention to return gradually, starting with 3 days a week. He talked about the cafe he had helped open, about Hazel and her reading lessons, about Leah and her talent for baking. He didn't go into detail about the connection between Lucas and Hazel. Some things were too personal, almost sacred. Martin listened attentively without interrupting. When Holden finished, he smiled. You seem different, he observed. More present. I feel different, Holden confirmed. After Martin left, promising to return later with updates on ongoing projects, Holden was alone again. He swiveled his chair to face the window, watching the clouds pass slowly across the blue summer sky. His reflection in the glass was sharp, the same face but different eyes, no longer empty, no longer just surviving. He remembered the first time he had spoken about Lucas with Hazel, how she had placed her small hand on his heart. I think he's still with you, right here. I made it, he said aloud to the reflection, to the city below, to the picture of Lucas on the desk. I'm alive again. The words hung in the air of the room, simple and true. It wasn't just about coming back to work, reassuming his position, taking on projects. It was about rediscovering purpose, reconnecting with the life he had paused when Lucas left. He took his phone out of his pocket and sent a text to Leah. Everything's fine here, see you for dinner. The reply came almost immediately. Hazel is already asking what time you'll be home. She wants to show you what she learned in her new book today. Holden smiled, putting the phone away. 2 years ago, he had left this room a broken man, directionless, just existing. Today he returned, whole in a different way, not healed from the loss, and as some wounds never fully close, but transformed by it. He didn't come back out of duty, obligation, or the expectations of others. He came back because there was finally a tomorrow to look forward to. He came back because, after so long wandering in an emotional desert, he had once again found the oasis of human connection. He came back because he had someone to come back to. It was a quiet autumn Saturday. The gentle wind swayed the curtains of the ajar window, bringing in the scent of fallen leaves and the damp earth after the morning's light rain. The sky had cleared, and now the afternoon sun streamed through the apartment windows, creating golden patterns that danced on the wooden floor as the clouds passed slowly. Hazel slept on the sofa, wrapped in a colorful blanket that Leah had knitted the previous winter. Her face was serene, her breathing deep and regular, her dark curls spread over the pillow like a small crown. Beside her, open and forgotten, were her new school books. She was so excited about the start of classes next week that she had spent the entire morning reading and rereading the first pages until exhaustion overtook her. In the kitchen, Leah prepared tea, moving with a quiet grace that had emerged in her over the past few months. Her hair, once always in a severe bun, now fell loosely over her shoulders. She wore a light blue blouse that highlighted her eyes, a new piece she would never have bought for herself before. The cake shop had changed not only her financial situation, but, more importantly, her outlook on life. The woman who lived in a constant state of alert, always waiting for the next blow from fate, now allowed herself small moments of peace. Holden watched her discreetly as he arranged small bowls of sugar and cookies on a tray. It had become a weekend ritual. Afternoon tea, cookies, quiet conversation while Hazel napped. Small moments of normality that, for someone who had lived so long in darkness, shone like treasures. The apartment was different too. Not just because of the new pictures on the walls or the plants that now occupied the windowsills, but because of something less tangible. The silence that filled the space wasn't empty or oppressive, like the one Holden had known for so long in his own apartment. It was a welcome, comfortable silence, like an embrace. Leah placed the kettle on the stove and leaned against the counter, watching Holden as he arranged the cookies in a circular pattern on the plate. The small wrinkles around her eyes, witnesses to past worries, now also marked moments of laughter. "But you know you're a part of this now, right?" she commented, almost as if thinking aloud, but with an intention that floated clearly between the words. Holden stopped what he was doing, lifting his eyes to meet hers. For a moment, he felt that old vertigo, the fear of allowing himself to belong again, of making space for more loss. But there was something different now, an understanding that had come slowly day by day, like gentle water that, with patience, shapes even the hardest stone. He glanced through the kitchen doorway, at Hazel asleep on the sofa, then back to Leah. "And even without promising anything," he said in a low voice, choosing his words carefully, "I've never been more real." It wasn't a grand declaration, nor an eternal promise. It was simply the truth, honest, imperfect, human. The smile that touched Leah's lips showed that she understood perfectly. Nothing more was needed. The soft whistle of the kettle broke the moment. As Leah poured tea into porcelain cups, the good ones that used to only come out of the cupboard on special occasions, a movement came from the living room. Hazel was waking up slowly, stretching languidly. She sat up on the sofa, her messy hair forming a wild halo around her face, her eyes still heavy with sleep. She rubbed her face with small hands and then, as if suddenly remembering something important, her eyes widened. "Wait," she murmured, getting up with new energy. She went to the piece of furniture in the corner of the room, a small dresser where she kept her treasures, shells found on their last trip to the beach, colorful stones, notes from her mother, drawings. She opened the bottom drawer and rummaged through the papers, her tongue stuck between her teeth in concentration, until she found what she was looking for. "I forgot I still had this," she said, returning to the sofa with a folded paper in her hands, yellowed at the edges with time. As Holden and Leah approached with the tea tray, she held the paper out to him. "He gave it to me, Lucas, before he left the park one day." The name fell into the silence like a stone in calm water. Holden placed the tray on the small table with hands that suddenly trembled. The world around him seemed to slow down as he took the folded paper, his fingers cautious as if touching something fragile and precious. He unfolded it slowly. A child's drawing appeared. Two stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun with pointy corners. The colors were vibrant, applied with the strong pressure that Lucas always used when coloring. It was exactly his style, unmistakable to a father who had saved every one of his son's creations. "This drawing, it was ours," he whispered, his voice thick with the emotion that rose like a wave. Hazel watched his reaction with that ancient wisdom that sometimes shone in her childish eyes. "He said it was special, that I should keep it safe." Holden held the paper with both hands, as if he could absorb through it the touch of the son who had created it. "Thank you, Hazel. You've given me a piece of myself back." Without words or hesitation, Hazel moved closer and rested her head on his shoulder, with the naturalness of someone who had always belonged there. Leah came closer, sitting beside them. Her hand found Holden's, their fingers intertwining without haste, the three of them together on the sofa, saying nothing, needing nothing. The afternoon sun bathed them in a golden halo that seemed, for a magical moment.